It begins in the hush of an endless forest. Pines sway, rain beads on moss, and somewhere between shadow and mist a shape moves, larger than a man, yet stepping lightly as if born of the woods. For centuries, travelers, hunters, and storytellers have spoken of this figure. They called it many names: Sasquatch, Skookum, hairy man, but the idea is always the same: a towering, elusive being straddling the line between legend and life. The story of Bigfoot is not just a curiosity whispered at campfires. It is a tapestry woven from indigenous oral traditions, European settler reports, roadside attractions, and modern science's attempts to explain the unexplainable. This is the journey of that tapestry, from ancient myth to modern phenomenon. According to Coast Salish tradition, for instance, the Sasq'ets is not a monster, but a people, a hidden nation of forest dwellers who watch humans from the trees. In the vast Pacific Northwest, this idea existed long before it was a headline or a meme. The land itself seems built to cradle such a story. Towering conifers, labyrinthine valleys, and fog that swallows entire ridges at dusk. Each element conspires to make sightings ambiguous, footsteps echo farther, and imaginations widen. This environment is not just backdrop, it's a co-author of the myth. Early anthropologists who interviewed elders in British Columbia noted that these beings were described with the same kind of respect given to powerful neighbors. They were not always feared. In some versions they were teachers or tricksters, in others protectors of sacred grounds. Even the name Sasquatch entered English only in the 1920s, adapted from the Hawkemulum language. The shift from cultural memory to Western folklore happened slowly, through misunderstandings, translations, and the allure of a mystery that sells newspapers. But how did a collection of regional legends transform into one of North America's most recognizable myths? The answer lies in a confluence of three forces. First, indigenous oral histories offered a rich foundation of stories about beings living parallel to human society. Second, the 19th and early 20th century expansion into remote territories created a constant trickle of unexplained tracks and glimpses. Third, a post-World War II culture hungry for the uncanny. UFOs, sea monsters, the Loch Ness photo, found Bigfoot irresistible. Together these forces made an ancient idea new again. Already, you can feel how the story spans eras and perspectives. The creature's footprints appear on petroglyphs, in missionary diaries, in loggers' jokes, in cryptozoology books, and in shaky smartphone clips uploaded last week. Whether you believe in a biological primate or a mythic archetype, the question remains: why does this figure persist? Why does it feel as if Bigfoot belongs to the land as much as the trees and rivers do? In the next movements of our story, we'll travel back to the earliest echoes of this legend, to the first tellers and their landscapes, and watch how an old name became a global phenomenon. To understand Bigfoot, you first have to step into its world. The Pacific Northwest of North America is not just a region on a map. It is an ecosystem that feels primeval, stretching from the misty coasts of Northern California, through Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, and inland to the rugged Rockies. These are some of the densest temperate rainforests on Earth. Douglas firs, Sitka spruces, and cedars soar like living cathedrals. Valleys twist and narrow, streams carve hidden canyons, and fog lingers even in summer. For thousands of years, human communities have lived here, shaping their cultures in rhythm with this landscape's abundance and its mysteries. According to elders from the Lummi Nation, the Tiasamequis moved silently through mountain passes long before the arrival of Europeans. Among the STSAL's people, the Sasq'ets were part of a cosmology that included beings of sky, water, and earth. In the Klamath region further south, stories speak of the giant hairy man as both a warning to children and a moral tale about respecting boundaries. These aren't isolated curiosities. They are threads in a much larger fabric of indigenous worldviews, where animals, spirits, and humans are intertwined rather than separated. European explorers and traders entered this environment with a different mental map. Their journals from the 18th and 19th centuries record towering trees, endless rain, and sometimes strange prints in mud or snow. But without the cultural context, they often interpreted local stories as superstition or exaggerated tall tales. Over time, As logging camps and settlements pushed deeper into remote valleys, reports of unexplained tracks and wild men began to surface in regional newspapers. It was a meeting of two storytelling traditions, one ancient and sacred, the other driven by curiosity and commerce. Geography magnified the legend. The sheer scale of these forests, some stretches larger than small European countries, makes it plausible that something could remain hidden, or at least that evidence could be misread. A fallen tree becomes a giant stride. An overlapping bear track looks like a single enormous footprint. In winter, snowdrifts blur edges and distort scale. This natural ambiguity feeds the story's endurance. The land provides not only the setting but the conditions for sightings, misinterpretations, and wonder. There's also a psychological geography at play. For settlers carving new lives out of wilderness, the figure of a wild man embodied both fear and fascination, the idea of a being untamed, perhaps representing what humans once were or could become again. In indigenous traditions, the same figure might be a reminder of kinship, of obligations to the unseen. When these perspectives collided, a hybrid myth emerged, part neighbor, part monster, part mirror. As the 20th century dawned, technology slowly entered the picture. Railways, cameras, mass circulation newspapers. The stage was set for a local, place-bound tradition to transform into a story with continental reach. But before that transformation, the legend existed mainly in the voices of elders, hunters, and travelers, echoing in the glens and river valleys of a vast green world where mystery still felt at home. Long before the name Bigfoot appeared in a headline, stories of a towering, hairy being had already passed from one generation to the next across many nations of the Pacific Northwest. These were not campfire curiosities, but integral pieces of living culture. Among the Coast Salish, the Sasq'ets Ales, the Nlakapamics, and other communities, elders described a people who lived apart yet parallel to humans, large, strong, covered in hair, but intelligent and purposeful. According to legend, the Sasq'ets could cross great distances swiftly and leave no trace except their footprints. They were not beasts but beings, sometimes with their own language, sometimes able to understand ours. In these early tellings, the being's role varied. In one story, it steals fish from nets and must be negotiated with rather than hunted. In another, it warns against trespassing on sacred grounds. Some narratives present it as a shapeshifter that can blend into the forest. These versions were not static folklore but living tools of teaching, ways to pass down ethics about sharing resources, respecting boundaries, and remembering that the seen world is not the whole world. As with many oral traditions, the same motif might appear in slightly different forms, depending on the village, the speaker, or the season. European missionaries and anthropologists who recorded these stories in the 19th and early 20th centuries often misunderstood them. Translating indigenous languages into English or French, they rendered nuanced beings into vague, wild men, or forest devils. This translation gap shifted the legend's tone. A neighbor became a monster. A moral tale became an exotic curiosity. Even the very word Sasquatch was a phonetic approximation, one of many attempts to fit a complex concept into a foreign alphabet. Hidden within these early records are clues to how the legend might have changed shape. For example, some notes describe entire families of these beings, suggesting a parallel society rather than a lone wanderer. Others speak of tracks found near berry patches or salmon runs, details that make sense within an ecosystem, not as random terror, but stripped of context and reprinted in newspapers. Such details fed the image of a solitary giant haunting the woods. It's important to recognize that for many indigenous people today, these beings are still part of a spiritual and cultural landscape, not just a curiosity for tourists. Elders sometimes refrain from speaking about them to outsiders, viewing the subject as sacred or easily trivialized. This caution itself has added to the legend's mystique. Outsiders hear fragments but not the full story, leaving room for speculation and reinvention. Thus, by the time the 20th century's mass media began to take interest, a foundation of centuries-old narratives already existed, narratives shaped by land, language, and values. When those stories intersected with a culture eager for marvels and monsters, the name Bigfoot was ready to be born. Every enduring legend needs its cast of characters, and Bigfoot's story is no exception. Although the modern image is of one towering, solitary creature, the older traditions describe a spectrum of beings with distinct personalities and roles. In the Pacific Northwest, names vary: Sasq'ets, Tiesamequis, Skookum, Hairy Man, but the underlying archetype is surprisingly consistent. Tall, covered in hair, human-like yet otherworldly, capable of both curiosity and power. According to several Coast Salish tellings, the Sasq'ets is not a single individual, but a people who choose to remain hidden. They have families, skills, and even spiritual knowledge humans have forgotten. This portrayal is closer to an alternate human lineage than to a monster. In some new Chenolf stories, however, a similar being appears as a kidnapper of children or a tester of courage, a narrative device to teach vigilance and boundaries. The same archetype can shift from neighbor to trickster to menace, depending on context, much like the fox in European fables or the coyote in southwestern tales. When European settlers arrived, they imported their own archetypes of wild men from Old World folklore. The Yeti of Himalayan stories, the wood-woes of medieval Europe, the green man carved into churches. These figures often represented the tension between civilization and wilderness, between order and instinct. Without realizing it, settlers mapped those ideas onto the indigenous stories they encountered, reinforcing the image of a shaggy, primitive giant lurking beyond the tree line. Over time, Bigfoot absorbed traits from both traditions: the hidden neighbor from native cosmology and the untamed man-beast from European imagination. Modern media added yet another layer of characterization. Early newspaper sketches showed a looming brute with ape-like features. By the mid-20th century, artists began depicting a more upright, almost noble creature, part gorilla, part Neanderthal, part forest spirit. Television specials in the 1970s and 1980s gave it a mournful, misunderstood air, turning it into a gentle giant rather than a threat. In children's cartoons and family movies, Bigfoot became even more humanized, sometimes comical, sometimes heroic. This evolution of character mirrors our shifting relationship with nature itself. In eras of expansion and resource extraction, the wild man represented danger and competition. In eras of environmental awareness, it became a symbol of mystery and stewardship, a reminder of what might be lost if wilderness disappears. Each portrayal reveals as much about the storyteller as about the story. What remains constant across all these versions is the sense of liminality. Bigfoot stands at a threshold between human and animal, myth and reality, seen and unseen. That liminality is powerful because it reflects our own uncertainties. We too are creatures of instinct and intellect, of cities and forests. In Bigfoot's silhouette, we glimpse an older version of ourselves and a possible future we've left behind. One of the most frequently retold episodes in the Bigfoot tapestry is the account of the Ape Canyon attack near Mount St. Helens in 1924. According to the miners who lived there, they were working a claim high on a remote ridge when, over several nights, they heard heavy footsteps and saw large, shadowy figures moving between the trees. On the last night, stones began pelting their cabin. The men claimed that huge, hairy beings threw rocks and tried to force their way inside, rattling the log walls and prying at the door. At dawn, the creatures vanished. The miners fled and told their story in Kelso, Washington, where the local newspaper picked it up. The canyon has been called Ape Canyon ever since. This story reads like a classic campfire thriller: isolation, a small group under siege, and a mysterious enemy in the dark. But look closer, and you see the dynamics of myth-making at work. First, the setting: a remote wilderness where any sound can echo strangely, where falling rocks or mischievous pranksters can create a sense of siege. Second, the witnesses, men under stress, perhaps primed to interpret noises as threats. Third, the retelling: a local paper eager for a sensational story. By the time the account reached readers elsewhere, it had gained the shape of an attack, cementing the idea of Bigfoot as an aggressive, physical creature. There are similar episodes in older native narratives, but with different framing. In some, the Sasq'ets throw stones to warn humans away from a sacred area, not to harm them. In others, it tests their courage or signals displeasure. The act is the same, the meaning differs. The minor story may echo that older pattern but stripped of context, leaving only the image of a siege in the night. As the tale spread, it inspired treasure hunters, tourists, and later television crews to visit the canyon, turning a private fear into public folklore. Another famous conflict story unfolded in Northern California in the late 1950s, when road construction workers discovered enormous footprints near Bluff Creek. The tracks were so large and clear that they seemed impossible to fake. Local journalists dubbed the mysterious maker Bigfoot, coining the modern name. This event was less dramatic than Ape Canyon, but more influential. Instead of an attack, it was evidence, visible, measurable, photographable. The name Bigfoot and the image of massive tracks traveled far beyond the Pacific Northwest, entering mainstream culture. Both episodes show how a legend's first mini-films emerge. A startling event occurs, people interpret it through existing stories, and the retelling adds drama. Each time, the creature becomes more tangible in the public mind. Rock throwing in the woods becomes an assault. Oversized prints become proof. And each retelling shifts the balance between mystery and materiality, between a being of legend and a beast of flesh and blood. Even today, hikers visiting Ape Canyon stand at the edge of the cliff and imagine shapes moving in the trees below. Whether or not anything happened in 1924, the place itself now radiates story. It's a reminder that myth does not just describe a landscape, it can inhabit it, changing how we feel as we step into the forest. If the first great storyline of Bigfoot centers on dramatic encounters in the American Northwest, the second unfolds in the high mountains of another continent, and in the imaginations of explorers who link the two. Tales of a large, hairy, human-like creature appear in the Himalayas as the Yeti or abominable snowman. In Nepalese and Tibetan traditions, the Yeti is a guardian of the mountains, sometimes a protector, sometimes a punisher of disrespect. When British climbers in the early 20th century brought back stories of enormous tracks in the snow, Western media fused those reports into a single thrilling narrative. Soon the wild man of the snows became a global sensation, gracing headlines, children's books, and expedition posters. This cross-pollination mattered. For many readers in Europe and America, the Yeti became a template for interpreting Sasquatch stories. If a hidden primate could survive in Himalayan ice, why not in North American forests? Cryptozoologists began to speak of a worldwide family of relict hominids, Yeti, Sasquatch, Almas, Yowie, each inhabiting a remote region. This idea lent Bigfoot an air of plausibility. It was no longer an isolated myth, but part of a pattern. Within North America itself, there are also regional differences. In the southeastern United States, stories of the skunk ape describe a smaller, smellier creature lurking in Florida swamps. In Alaska, some speak of the Bushman, a powerful being that can appear and vanish without trace. In the Great Lakes region, Anishinaabe stories of the Wendigo merge cannibalistic spirits with the idea of a giant wild man, though that figure carries a very different moral meaning. Each of these variations reflects local landscapes and fears: swamp versus mountain, ice versus forest, hunger versus trespass. There are also modern alternative versions, shaped by media rather than geography. Some depict Bigfoot as an interdimensional traveler, able to slip between worlds. Others frame it as a surviving species of giant ape, like Gigantopithecus. Still others treat it as a consciousness or forest spirit, rather than flesh and blood. These interpretations may sound fringe, but they keep the myth alive by offering new angles for believers and skeptics alike. What's striking is how easily the legend adapts. It can be a moral teacher in one story, a biological relic in another, a cosmic wanderer in a third. It can inhabit icy slopes or humid swamps, national parks or suburban greenbelts. This adaptability is not a weakness, but a strength. It lets the story travel with people, shifting to fit new times and places. In an age of the internet, a blurry clip from Ohio can spark debates in Australia. A moldy footprint cast can become a trending hashtag. The myth's regional roots remain, but its branches reach everywhere. These alternative versions also echo a deeper human pattern. Every culture has some figure at the edge of the known, part human, part animal, dwelling in the wilderness. It might be called a yeti, an ogre, a woodwose, a djinn. In telling those stories, societies map their boundaries and anxieties. Bigfoot, like those other beings, thrives on the frontier between the familiar and the wild. Legends survive not only because of their stories, but because of their symbols. Bigfoot's image, a massive, fur-covered silhouette striding through trees, is itself a symbol, carrying layers of meaning far beyond a literal creature. In indigenous traditions, that figure is often a living reminder of balance. To see the Sasq'ets near salmon streams or berry patches was not simply to witness a giant, but to encounter a message. Respect the abundance, take only what you need. Remember that unseen neighbors share the land. Even the footprints, the myth's most enduring icon, work as symbols. They mark a threshold where the known world ends and the unknown begins. Large enough to impress yet fleeting, they invite both wonder and skepticism. A cast of a giant footprint displayed at a roadside attraction is more than plaster. It is a ritual object in the modern sense, a tangible piece of the invisible. Numbers play a subtle role as well. Many reports mention tracks in pairs or threes, hinting at family groups rather than loners. In some Coast Salish stories, 3 knocks on a tree signal the presence of a Sasq'ets, a pattern that resonates with the sacred triads found in other aspects of their cosmology. In popular culture, the rule of 3 appears again. 3 quick glimpses in a video, 3 blurry frames in the famous Patterson-Gimlin film, 3 witnesses on a hiking trail. Whether deliberate or not, these repetitions give the legend rhythm and mnemonic power. Animals associated with Bigfoot stories also carry meaning. Owls hooting at night, deer freezing on a trail, bears leaving ambiguous tracks. Each becomes a sign. In some native teachings, the Sasq'ets appears when people forget the old ways, a sign of imbalance, like a warning drum in the forest. In modern cryptozoology circles, that same appearance may be framed as evidence of a rare species at the edge of extinction. 2 interpretations, 1 symbol. Objects and rituals around Bigfoot sightings echo this layering. People leave offerings of fruit or shiny stones, hoping to lure the creature closer. Amateur researchers knock on trees or howl in the dark, imitating supposed calls. These practices resemble folk rituals as much as wildlife research. They create a sense of participation in something bigger, turning an ordinary night in the woods into a liminal experience. In art and merchandise, Bigfoot's silhouette has become a totem of the untamed. You'll see it on bumper stickers, beer labels, hiking gear, and environmental campaigns. The same shape can signal irony, pride in local heritage, or a call to protect wild spaces. This flexibility mirrors the creature's own shape-shifting nature and story. It is no longer only a being. It is an emblem of mystery, of wilderness, of the possibility that something still lies beyond the reach of our maps. Through these symbols, Bigfoot functions as a cultural mirror. It reflects our relationship with the unknown, with nature, and with each other. It carries warnings and hopes, humor and reverence, all wrapped in a single shaggy outline moving between trees. The shadow of Bigfoot no longer lives only in the forest. It moves through our everyday culture. A century ago, the name Sasquatch was unfamiliar outside a few communities of British Columbia. Today, Bigfoot appears in headlines, jokes, brand names, and emoji-like stickers. This transformation from local being to global icon reveals how myths travel in the modern world. Language itself carries the echo. Bigfoot's sighting has become shorthand for any extraordinary but unverified claim. Tracking Bigfoot can mean chasing an elusive goal. People who have never set foot in a North American forest still know what a Bigfoot hunter is. This linguistic spread shows how a myth becomes a metaphor, its meaning stretching far beyond the literal. Pop culture has embraced the creature in almost every genre. Documentaries and found footage horror films use it as a source of tension. Children's cartoons recast it as a gentle giant with a sweet tooth. Indie games let players roam pixelated forests in search of a blurry silhouette. Television shows build entire seasons around expeditions to find it, blending reality TV with cryptozoology. Each portrayal reinforces some aspect of the legend while adding a twist of its own. Merchandise and tourism have also turned Bigfoot into an industry. Roadside museums in Washington and Oregon display footprint casts. Towns host annual Sasquatch festivals with costumes, crafts, and themed races. Restaurants offer Bigfoot burgers. Hikers pose next to wooden cutouts on scenic trails. These activities blur the line between folklore and fun, giving people a way to participate in a story without needing to believe or disbelieve. Even science and technology echo the myth. Night vision cameras, thermal drones, and DNA sampling kits promise to, finally, prove Bigfoot's existence, yet the legend remains just out of reach. Paradoxically, every inconclusive result fuels more fascination. It's as if the creature has adapted not only to the forest, but to our expectations, staying one step ahead of proof. In digital culture, the legend thrives as well. Reddit threads share supposed sightings. TikTok videos mix humor and horror. Memes show Bigfoot sipping coffee behind a tree, a spectator to human absurdity. The story that once traveled by canoe and newspaper now travels at the speed of hashtags. All these echoes serve a deeper function. They keep alive the sense that mystery still exists in a mapped and measured world. They give communities an identity marker, a reason to gather, a source of local pride. And they remind each of us, even scrolling on a phone, that somewhere in some forest, something might still be walking unseen. Modern science has not ignored Bigfoot. Over the past half-century, wildlife biologists, anthropologists, and amateur researchers have collected footprint casts, hair samples, scat, and countless eyewitness reports. Yet no verifiable remains or clear genetic evidence have been produced. Bears, especially when walking on their hind legs or leaving overlapping tracks, account for many sightings. Known primates cannot survive the cold winters of the Pacific Northwest without shelter or fire. Gigantopithecus, an extinct giant ape from Asia, is sometimes invoked as a candidate, but fossil evidence places it in a very different time and environment. In short, from a zoological standpoint, the odds are vanishingly small. Anthropologists, however, see something equally interesting, a living myth cycle adapting to modern conditions. When they map Bigfoot reports, clusters appear along highways and recreation areas, places where people enter wilderness, not deep within untouched regions. This pattern suggests the legend thrives where humans brush up against the edge of the unknown. The same phenomenon occurs with lake monsters, UFO sightings, and ghost stories. At the boundaries of our experience, imagination fills gaps in perception. Psychologists point out how memory and expectation shape what we see. In dense forests, with low light and heightened alertness, our brains may convert ambiguous shapes into familiar forms. Once primed by a story, a person can interpret a tree stump as a crouching figure, a bear as a giant man. The resulting testimony feels sincere because the experience itself feels real. In this sense, Bigfoot is not a hoax but a cognitive phenomenon, a mixture of environment, culture, and perception. And yet science alone cannot erase the power of tradition. Indigenous elders who still tell of the Sasq'ets are not making cryptozoological claims. They are transmitting a worldview. In that worldview, the forest is alive with presences, and respect is more important than proof. From this perspective, whether the being has flesh and blood matters less than what it teaches. The story keeps people mindful of the unseen, careful with the land, aware that not everything is ours to measure. This tension between proof and meaning is what gives the modern Bigfoot myth its vitality. Skeptics dismiss it for lack of evidence. Believers defend it with passion. But both groups participate in the same larger narrative, the search for mystery in a world of data. The legend endures because it occupies a space that science has not fully mapped and culture has not fully abandoned. In the end, Bigfoot stands less as a question of biology than as a testament to our hunger for wonder. From the first whispered stories along salmon streams to today's viral clips, the legend has walked beside us, changing shape as we change, carrying echoes of kinship, fear, stewardship, and mystery. Whether a hidden primate ever roamed the forests of the Pacific Northwest may remain unknown, but what is known is the power of a story to knit together past and present, tradition and curiosity. Standing at the edge of a misty trail at dawn, You can almost feel why the myth endures. The smell of wet cedar, the echo of a distant knock, the sudden stillness of a deer. These are more than sensory impressions. They are cues in an ancient drama, telling you that the world is not as empty as it seems. In that moment, the boundary between the seen and unseen softens. You are part of the story, just as generations before you were. Bigfoot's modern life, on mugs, memes, documentaries, and trail signs, may seem playful, even trivial. Yet beneath the humor lies a serious yearning, that in a mapped and measured planet, some mystery still eludes us. The silhouette moving between trees becomes a symbol of everything not yet explained, of the wildness still within the world and within ourselves. According to legend, those who meet the Sasq'ets are changed. They return quieter, more attentive, aware of a larger circle of life. That is a lesson our era, with its constant noise and endless screens, may need more than ever. You don't have to believe in a giant, hair-covered being to feel that call. You only have to step outside, listen, and remember that the unknown still exists. Perhaps that is Bigfoot's greatest gift. Not a footprint in mud or a blur on film, but an invitation to wonder, to respect, to imagine. A reminder that even now, there are stories waiting at the edge of the forest, asking us to look up from our maps and see with older eyes. And so the figure walks on, between trees and centuries, a companion to our curiosity. Whether it is flesh and blood or a creature of myth, Bigfoot has already left its track on our culture and our imagination. The question is not simply, does it exist, but what does it reveal about us? In searching for it, we find a reflection of our own longing, to believe that somewhere, beyond the last trail marker, mystery still walks free.